of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It's a delight to be here with you this morning. Any of you ever have a dream, maybe when you were younger, that you had an exam in school and you arrived there and you couldn't find the right classroom? Ministers, I think, sometimes have the dream of showing up for worship and nobody else does. So I am delighted that you are here and we can share in these moments together. One of the great joys for many of us, I think, is coming across a book that captivates you, one that you just relish. It's the kind of book that seems to hold a treasure in almost every page for you. The kind of book you find yourself pulling off the shelf years later after the first time you read it, and it still brings great delight to you. This little book is one of those books for me. It's entitled, First You Have to Row a Little Boat, Reflections on Life and Living. The author, Richard Bodie, shares his love of sailing and what he has learned from sailing that has been helpful as he has journeyed through life. Well, actually, just the later part of his life, because he didn't write this book till he was 60 years old. He's often said it took him 60 years to write this book, to keep learning along the way. He offers insights by using this metaphor of sailing. Aha, that's why it's here. He offers this insights, using this metaphor, into life's challenges as well as opportunities in a way that is full of poetry and philosophy, wisdom and inspiration, so that many non-sailors have found it to be a wonderful read. For many readers, it has been course-altering. The title, First You Have to Row a Little Boat, comes from a conversation that Bodie had when he was 14 years old. He lived on Long Island, and he watched, all his early years, he watched sailboats glide by the harbor near where he lived. So he finally went to an old salty guy at a local shipyard and just went up to him and said, "Will you teach me how to sail?" And the old salt said, "You ever been in a sailboat?" "Nope." "You ever been in any kind of a boat?" "Nope." "Well, fella, the first thing you need to do is learn to row a little boat." This old gentleman was wise not only to the ways of the sea, but I think also to life. He knew that this young fella needed to learn some basics before he could move on to a sailboat and wherever the future would lead him. And I think this is so true of life as well, and particularly when it comes to our spiritual journey. The metaphor of a journey is very much a part of our sacred scriptures. And this morning I want to weave together this notion of learning as we go through life, through our journey of life, with a particular journey that the Israelites took, the one we heard a few moments ago that Leonard read about the Exodus. I invite you to join with me for a few minutes in pondering this incredible journey of the Exodus. Specifically, I want us to take a look at one aspect of this story, of this journey, and if it has any lessons that it might hold for us today. One of the ways that I like to explore the scriptures is what I call reading in the white spaces on the page. That is, reading between the lines, or even between the words, that white space. When I read the story of the Exodus, I am drawn to wonder what was going on behind the scenes. What was it like for those folks who were about to set off in haste on an amazing journey? What are we not told in scriptures that we might at least ponder and see what it says to us? I wonder, therefore, what it was like for them to have to choose what they would take on the journey with them when they had to make those decisions in haste. They had to leave Egypt pretty quickly. It may not be unlike what some are facing today out west as the wildfires approach their homes and they have to flee. What do they take and what do they leave behind? The Israelites had to make those decisions, so I wonder what it was like for them to look around their house in those last minutes or maybe an hour or so, who knows. But to look around and say, what will I need for this journey? What do I want to take, even if I don't need it for the journey? What can I possibly not leave behind? What must go with me? And therefore, what shall I leave behind? They probably also had to make a similar decision when it came to their livestock, very much a part of their livelihood. Which livestock were up for the journey and would be helpful in the journey? And which ones had to be left behind? Incredibly difficult decisions. Now, all we're told in the scriptures about this decision process is that Moses took along the bones of Joseph, for that was a promise that had to be fulfilled. That Joseph had asked his people, when you leave Egypt, take my bones with you wherever you go. And so that's all we know for sure, is that Moses took the bones of Joseph. So it leaves us wondering, what else did they take for that journey? Now, I'm guessing if they were anything like most Americans, they overpacked. As I read of their arduous journey, I wonder, as I read between the lines, if they took more than they really needed for the journey, and maybe even more than they could carry and manage on the journey. And I wonder if at some point they didn't start shedding some of those items they brought initially, left them by the wayside, because they realized, yeah, they're kind of nice, but at this point we really don't need them. They're not helpful to us. In fact, maybe they've become a burden. How did they come to realize what they really needed for the journey? That's our question this morning. What do we really need for the journey that we are on in our particular season of life? Now, this is a little bit of confession time. I have a lifelong fascination with luggage. Are you laughing because you do too, or what?
We're laughing at you.
Just laughing at you. Gary has tolerated it. I've had this lifelong fascination for luggage that is well made and made for specific purpose. At one point, I traveled about 100,000 miles a year in the air for when I worked for my denomination on a national level. I was traveling the country. And so I have a deep and abiding respect for the individual who created the rollerboard. I suspect this item has saved a lot of us from appointments with a chiropractor. It is so functional, and it does the trick. But I've also had some wonderful backpacks along the way. This one, for instance, was on my back when I climbed down to Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And amazingly, it made it up with me to the 11 and a half hours on the way back up. This is when I learned the value of packing light. What seems light at the beginning can become very heavy at the end. This little backpack has been on my back twice. I'm so grateful for when I walked in the footsteps of Jesus in the Holy Lands. And one of the things I've come to realize is that luggage, backpacks, can bring back wonderful memories. Places we've been, and things we've seen, folks we've encountered. I appreciate luggage, backpacks, that meet the specific needs of a particular journey, a particular trip we're taking. So whether it's a suitcase or a backpack, it's nice to have something